Hello, everyone. Welcome to Recess, brought to you by Roadmunk. We're really glad you can take a break with us today. So we've postponed all of our in-person product-to-product events that were hosted in Toronto, New York, and Chicago due to COVID-19. So for the time being, Recess is where you can learn about all things product with a lot of awesome PMs. My name is Amy, and I'm a content marketing specialist at Roadmunk, and I'll be hosting your Recess session. If you do follow our community, we also have a podcast that I produce and host, and you can subscribe to on your preferred podcasting platform. On our latest episode, it features Jitu Patel from Box, and he's the Chief Technology Officer who said, product companies should be building products that are 10 times better than the competition. Otherwise, it's really hard for a user to switch their behavior to using your product. I'd love to know what your take is on this because it's kind of a hot take. Also in that episode, G2 tells us how he went from making $4.25 an hour as a waiter at Sizzlers to investing in his first company at just 22 years old with a $250,000 loan in hand, and then moving to being an executive at Box, whose company has 70 million users and 100,000 customers. So Product to Product is our podcast. Definitely check it out if you're interested. As for Recess, we'll be recording this live session, but we will also be posting the recording plus a summary with the time codes on our Medium page in the coming days. And we've got lots of people, so we can just get started. Feel free to let us know where you're from, what company you're at, and what role you're in, and let us know if you're a repeat attendee because we love seeing that. Today we have Liz, Roadmunk's events manager, moderating. She'll be taking your questions, so feel free to send them in throughout this conversation, and we'll answer them in the last 10 minutes of this 30-minute session. Okay, so let's get started. Today we have Dan from Instacart with us. Welcome to Recess, Dan. Sorry, I'm just gonna unmute Dan. Oh, there we go.
Thanks for having me. Happy to be here.
So Dan is currently a senior PM at Instacart, and he spent 4 years at Work Market and over 5 years at Kobo. Dan, can you give us a quick 3 to 5 minute summary of your background and how you got into product?
Yeah, absolutely. For me, it goes pretty far back. I would go as far back as university. So I was in the computer engineering program at University of Waterloo, which has a co-op program, and I got to try out various roles through that process. And so it spanned kind of like QA roles, a little bit of dev, and some other roles around the kind of like project coordination and management side of things. And what I learned through that process was like I liked the tech space, obviously, but I really enjoyed being kind of in the middle of projects, not just on the QA, not just on the dev, and I liked helping communicate requirements over and why we were doing certain things, and if anything, helping shape those requirements where possible. And so it wasn't product management, but it was just that idea. I didn't even know what product management was at the time, but just that idea of being in the middle and being able to see all players and what everyone was doing and how it all came together. And so that's what I learned through my co-op. That was the biggest thing I probably learned through my co-op experience, in addition to having the opportunity to work in different cities and seeing how different companies operate in general. But what I decided to do coming out of school was to go back into QA, because what I also saw was that QA had this opportunity to be a final kind of gatekeeper for product and understand that before this goes live, is this what we actually want to put out there? And then so I started at Kobo, and what was good about Kobo was that we had a great QA manager, Carolyn, that gave QA a voice, and we were allowed to go beyond our role. We were allowed to make suggestions. We were there to represent the users. And so we just continued to do that as QA. A lot of us were very technical as well, so we understood how changes would impact things downstream. And so I was QA on various teams there, from the website to a little bit of mobile, and then ultimately on our content management system team, which is where all the content came in and processed before it went live on the site to sell. And it would respect all those rules that publishers wanted to follow. And so through my QA role, I became kind of like QA lead. I started doing a little bit of the product ownership side, where I would help create the stories, make sure there were assigned to developers, and kind of like manage that side of the backlog alongside the existing PM there. And then the opportunity arose at one point for that role to be taken on by me. And And it was a little bit funny. So I was already kind of doing the job. We were in a meeting where our VP R&D was giving updates on teams, and I hadn't been talked to at that point, but a slide came up where it said I was a product owner for that team now. And that's how I found out I was the product owner for the
Congratulations,
team.
it's
I said,
you.
oh, okay, all right, I'll start doing the job properly now, I guess,
Yeah.
because I wasn't really sure. I was just taking on little bits of tasks before. And so I would say that was like my first phase into product management, was that product ownership role. And it was pretty straightforward to start because we had one main stakeholder, our publisher operations team, which represented the publishers and did a lot of management of books on our platform.
Uh-huh.
And pretty much what they felt was the most important next thing to work on was the most important thing to work on. And so prioritization was kind of like that next stage for me that I didn't have to worry about immediately because I only had the one stakeholder and they knew what they wanted.
Yeah.
As the platform grew a little bit more, we got more stakeholders like the Writing Life self-publishing platform. We had our operations team that did kind of like larger, more technical operations. We had our big data team, obviously the website, and our operations, like the technical operations team as well. And so now I had more requests coming in from different places, and I had to figure out how to prioritize things that way. And that was kind of like my next stage of growth within product. But all of this was also very back end, and I didn't have a lot of front end experience by then. And so I asked to move over to the mobile side, where I could get a little bit more exposure on that side of things. And so I got moved over and I got to manage the iOS and Windows mobile apps. And so that's where I had one app, which was very mature in the iOS app. And it really just needed iterations on features while we were doing a major rehaul on the Android side at the time. But the Windows mobile app was actually a little bit more fun because it was early stages, like it had already started, and we were working closely with Microsoft to create this new app for mobile, Windows Mobile. And we got to redesign a little bit here and there, redo how the library was managed a little bit with the design team. And a lot of that was done with research with users. And that was kind of like my first exposure to having research done with users and taking that research and making decisions off of that versus working with like internal stakeholders before, for the most part. And then I saw another level of growth that I wanted to take and go even more earlier in the process of creating a new product. And that's kind of when Work Market contacted me. It was pretty good timing. I was just wrapping up some pat leave with my first child.
Yeah.
And there was this opportunity they wanted to start a new team in Toronto, create a new product, and it kind of like hit all the check boxes that I had for myself for a next role, and kind of just jumped at it.
Yeah. So for those who don't know what Work Market is, what is it?
Yeah, Work Market is a enterprise software as a service, and it helps clients effectively manage their on-demand talents, like freelancers and workers. You can find them, you can send them work, and pay them, and do this like in an efficient and compliant manner. So at a very high level, you have your enterprise clients and you have your workers on the other side.
Yeah. So you mentioned that at Work Market, you transitioned into working with enterprise clients. How did you have to adjust your product management work style with enterprise clients? Because they're pretty different from just regular users.
Yeah, and I guess to even get to that, I first got to work with the freelancers with the mobile product that we created, and we created some good processes in place that we found beneficial that I ended up bringing over to the enterprise side. And because we had started a greenfield project with zero code to start, we got to build in analytics to start. We got to build in processes for feedback and really tight feedback loops as much as possible before the product even went out the door. That was like user interviews, that was prototype testing with just like InVision files, actually having a beta program, putting feedback mechanisms in the app so they could email the team directly. So all these things were built in, and it was really built into the DNA of the team to constantly reach out for feedback and naturally get feedback from users and continually improve the product even before it was out. So when I moved to the enterprise side, I joined some ongoing research around how companies manage their talent. And it was just about wrapping up, and we were going to look at the insights. And I also had the advantage of a new team was going to form based off this research. So I had some time to understand what was coming out of this research and how to best approach it before this team was actually formed. So huge advantage and privilege there. We saw some major objectives that we wanted to achieve out of that research. And now it was more about, okay, how are we going to execute on this the best way possible with enterprise clients? And traditionally, what I had been told before taking on this kind of work was that enterprise clients are not open to being tested on. Um,
You don't
Whereas the
say.
freelance, yeah, and freelancers, the workers, they were very open to it. We could A/B test on them. We could try new things with them. We could say, we could move faster with them.
Yeah,
But they said like, no, they're not as open to that. They want a lot of lead time. If a change is going to happen, their processes are very sensitive. If they don't feel like work can get done, that's a big problem for work market. We're stopping what that company is trying to achieve.
right.
And so I felt like a core part of this though was just showing them that we're genuine about what we're trying to do. We're really trying to identify and solve their problems. And so part of that was showing them the research results and what our understanding of it was and what insights that we have and what objectives that we would want to try and achieve and why these ones were prioritized over the others. Like this is
Right.
what we were hearing the most. This would solve the biggest problems for you. And do you agree?
Yeah.
And then from there, we asked them if they want to continue to be part of this process. If we had prototypes or mocks created next, do you want to see them and provide feedback? And once we went down that path, they started being more open to providing feedback and wanting to be part of this process because they see that we've identified a need of theirs that we're trying to solve.
Right.
So we would put these mocks and prototypes in front of them. We would continue to ask them at the end of every session is, do you want to continue to be part of this? Next step is kind of like a beta program. It's probably going to take X amount of time, but we'll stay in touch in any case. And this went all the way through to the actual production release. So some of the changes we wanted to make were very dramatic ones, where we weren't sure if it would honestly work until it was out there. So one thing that we did that we'd never had on the platform before was to create an opt-in experience where, let's say you're managing your talent, you go to that screen the way it is in its current state, but a banner would appear at the top and saying, hey, do you want to try this out? And we only released it to the clients that said they wanted to see this first.
Okay. Yeah.
And then on a per user basis, they could opt into the experience, try and complete their task. And if they couldn't, they could opt back out. And when they opted back out, we would prompt them for feedback on why they're opting back out. And sometimes it could have just been like, hey, I'm just not ready to fully test this yet.
Yeah.
I want to complete my task and then maybe I'll come back later. Or maybe we're missing a field that that's really important to them to accomplish their task. But I think a lot of the time what we heard was they wanted to accomplish something. They said we didn't have it, but we knew we did have that feature. And so it was more about a discoverability issue that we needed to improve on. So you never know what you're going to learn sometimes that way. But the employers were really happy with it. The account managers were happy with our approach, which traditionally they're very protective about their clients. And they wouldn't want us to just release something new to them without them being prepped ahead of time. But for this one, they said, once we were done with our initial set of beta testers, they were fine with opening it up to all clients because the opt-in experience was working really well, where it gave them control over how they're going to use that feature and how they're going to migrate over to it. So that was a success for us.
Right. I mean, yeah, as a user, I think back to there are some products that I use and it's like a forced change overnight and everyone's like, I hate this design. Why I can't find anything I want? Versus there are some products where it's like, do you want the new version or the simple version or the pared down version? So I guess your tip is with enterprise clients, give them that option to opt in versus a hard change.
Yeah, and all along the way, as much as possible, trying to involve them in the process. So it makes things a lot more comfortable for them to switch over.
Yeah. So kind of going back, you talked about when you got to Work Market, one of the projects you worked on was to create like something new, which was like the mobile app. And you had the privilege of new team, new frameworks, new structure. Can you tell us about some of the process of creating this new product? And I guess, how do you make a decision on what to include, what not to include?
Yeah, that's a great question because this was a new space for all of us on the team. And so part of it was just understanding what the product was already. There was a lot of features on the website. And so we had some data that we could look at to see where the freelancers were going on the website already. And what was, so actually we had a little bit of a guide. We knew there was 3 main areas that we wanted to have the app achieve. And that was finding work, getting your work done, and getting paid.
Yes.
Fell within those buckets. They became candidates to be in that first release. And we first included everything. And we made an estimate. It was way too long. And they said, all right, no, it's got to be shorter than that. So we had to ruthlessly prioritize what would go in and go out. And so it was various features that we needed to pull out based on data of how often they were being used and how effective it would help you achieve those three aspects of finding work, finishing work, getting paid. Finding work being kind of the most important. Getting paid was actually pretty straightforward, but finding work was very, very sensitive. So there's two main ways that you can get work on the platform. And one is kind of like this public marketplace. Companies can post jobs and you can go find them as a freelancer, apply and get the job. There's another way where you'd be directly invited to a job. So a company may have a previous relationship with you, or they have you in a group or something, but some way they've invited you directly. And that way was the more effective way of getting a job by far. So we decided not to put the marketplace in the first version. Since it wasn't an effective way of getting a job. Mm-hmm. That's what the data said. Yeah. So we released on Android first. That's where most of our users were. And we just saw the ratings starting to tank on the Google Play Store.
The data got it wrong.
The data, or we used the data wrong and something, but we got it wrong. And the ratings started to tank. It was kind of, we knew we were going to put the marketplace in.
Was it within like a week of release? What's the timeline?
It was pretty immediate.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's go within a week, and it continued. So we knew immediately, all right, prioritize the marketplace feature, and it would definitely need to be in the first version of the iOS app as well. And as soon as we put that feature out, people started rating it a lot better. iOS has always traditionally had a high rating. I think it's in the 4.5, 4.6 range. But when we thought back on it, we were wondering, like, oh, so why did we get this wrong? We do a retro on everything that we do. Yeah. And there could be multiple reasons, but in general, we're a company called Work Market, and people probably expected a marketplace to be there. It was probably a major one. And just the traditional expectation of how you get a job is job boards and listings of jobs and things like that. And the app was well suited in its first version for very mature users on the platform, people who are already established, getting work on the platform, getting invited. It was working fine for them. But for a lot of users that are newer and looking for that first job or those first set of jobs, then they're not really sure what to do. The marketplace isn't there. Yeah. They may not suddenly get an invite if they haven't filled their profile with the right information.
Yeah.
So we learned from that, and we fixed it quickly for Android, and we knew not to make that mistake for iOS.
So the second iteration for iOS was didn't follow the data, but it should be okay.
Yes.
So Dan, we have a great question, kind of pertaining to what we talked about with opting in. So one of our attendees has asked, can you talk more about the work you had to do to enable the opt-in function for enterprise users to test a new workflow? In practice, I found that while we want to do this, it's complicated to do for one piece of a workflow or to be able to navigate back and forth within a task between the new and old experiences.
Yeah, I guess so some of that leveraged some existing functionality that was already on the platform. We had feature toggling. So we had an infrastructure in general already in place to enable features for certain clients and not certain clients. Like that's something that was just, with enterprise software, you kind of just need to have. Different clients get different packages of features. So that we had to leverage at one level. What we also decided to do was have like two different URLs, one for the original experience, so that stayed on one URL, and then we had the new experience on a new URL. And so we could toggle you can directly go to either one you want, but that toggle would change your default of which one you would get when you entered that feature. And that was generally how we approach it. It was just kind of a technical solution to it. But I'm not sure if that answers the question though.
Let us know, attendee, if that answered your question. So it's fascinating because you talk about working on a new product, the challenges that you've hit with building that new Work Market mobile app. But what are some other challenges you've hit as a PM? And what were some of the major learnings? I think as a junior PM or an APM, you kind of just have to go through those things. What were some of those for you?
That's a good question. So for me, I think one of the hardest things is I like going into spaces I don't understand very well, but it's also a challenge to go into those spaces, whether it was Kobo with e-reading, Work Market with freelancers, and Instacart with the grocery retail space. I've never really fully understood any of these spaces before I went into them. And so a lot of time is spent on just understanding what the company is trying to achieve, why it even exists, and then understanding what my team's role is going to be in that bigger picture. And that's just generally a challenge that every PM is going to have to go through, and finding out what processes are already in place, how to leverage the existing resources in the company, and then understanding how you can achieve your objectives. Like, that's going to be different for every person, for every team, and every company you get into, and that's a big
Totally.
hurdle to get over, and it takes months to figure all that out. And if I were to, my like even deeper answer to this question is, it kind of goes beyond product management for me personally. Is I've generally grown up being kind of like a shyer type of person. And even in school, if a teacher was asking a question, I'm not putting my hand up. You have to call on me. And then even then, like, why do you do that? But what I learned from that is I need to identify why I'm hesitant about something, and then finding like, what is that hurdle? Like, is it the answer that I'm not very confident in? I'm like, all right, what would make me confident about that answer? What would make me understand this problem a little bit more, so that I can speak to it, so I can make a good recommendation that I'm fully confident and can stand behind. And that's kind of like my personal challenge that I'll continue to have. But I'll continue to look to solve by understanding, like, all right, I'm afraid of something. I'm not really sure what it is. I'm trying to identify what it is that's holding me back, solve for that, be comfortable with it, and then I can move forward and have confidence in that.
Yeah. Um, Here's another question. How do you balance the business needs and product slash customer needs?
Um,
The age old question of balance.
yeah. So for me, there's like two main areas you need to consider. Yeah, the company is trying to achieve a certain set of goals, and I'll call that the business side. And then you have a culture in the company of the type of product that you're okay with putting out there, and you need to marry those two. Neither one takes a backseat to the other, but as you're trying to solve these business needs, you need to be embedding your company culture into it. If you're you need to have an accessible product, like that might be part of it, because your customer base is heavily dependent on that. You need to build with a certain design feel and love, that and user experience that makes sense for users. You don't want to cheat them in any way. And I feel like those things come through company culture, and
Right.
product development, product design, engineering culture more than anything. And your business needs are pretty straightforward for the most part, and it's just
Yeah.
executing on them with the culture in mind. I'm sorry, that's not like the most detailed response, but I feel like
No,
it's
I mean,
very
it's,
company specific.
yeah, it is very company specific. And it seems like it is a culture thing because you have to align both in your roadmap. Let's say, if you know that's what you're going to produce in your roadmap, then if this is a thing that you're going to do, then if it doesn't fit in the roadmap, don't bother doing it. There's no
Yeah,
point.
and I think, and one thing that actually helped us at Work Market was we did a team charter where we talked about like our purpose as a team. Like, what are we doing here? What is our long-term purpose for this company? What is our purpose for this fiscal year? Like, what are we going to actually be able to achieve in this fiscal year? And then what are some attributes of this team to define our identity? So some of the examples of that with our mobile team at Work Market was, we want 5 stars. Like, we want to be 5 star in everything. We want our app ratings to be 5 star. We want our experience to be 5 star. Nothing should be subpar. We
Yeah.
want to test early, test often, things like that. If you
Yeah.
sit down with the team and like, what is our culture? What is our identity? We want that to live through everything that we create.
Just curious on my own end, how does that all break apart though? I feel like that's very well known in product. Like, let's align, let's communicate, let's get this all figured out. But then where does the breakdown happen?
I think a lot of times you create these things and then you forget about them during like a year later, let's say.
Yeah.
So different things that you can do is retros or bringing them up at certain points. We bring up roadmap before we do planning. We at retro we talk about kind of like who we are as a team, and like sad faces in our retro can just talk to, we're not living up to these values.
Yes.
And so you need to embed them in your ceremonies to some extent. And you also need to revisit them if they need to be adjusted, whether that's quarterly or yearly or whatever makes sense for your team. What you set initially isn't necessarily going to be hold true over time.
Right.
So there's two parts to it. Is one is making sure that it's constantly visible and regularly brought up, and then two, making sure that you adjust over time as well. People on the team will change, your objectives will change, like things change over time. You need to factor that in.
Yeah. And the person that's responsible for bringing it up, consistently making changes to it, is the product manager?
I would say it's dependent on the organization, but traditionally I've seen it's the PM that takes that on.
Yeah. Here's a last question. What new problems in product do you think will be introduced with faster iterations?
New problems with fast iterations. I mean, I think the nature of it is that we're constantly going to expose problems with fast iterations. And I think that's what we're doing with agile development and tight feedback loops. Is just that we're okay with these problems coming up. But types of problems that come up with fast iterations is that, what have I traditionally seen? Scalability is usually one of the big things that is hard to handle with fast iterations. Instacart has seen that recently with the surge in demand. We probably didn't plan for that. I mean, I think we've openly said that, and just trying to manage that. I think that's scalability is something that I see over and over again with fast iteration, and you will deal with it when the time comes, and then you'll iterate fast on that.
Right. This is a good question because I'm curious too. How often do you bring users in to test your product? And do you only test with high fidelity prototypes or also with low fidelity prototypes?
I say you try and be open to having as many feedback loops as possible. So as soon as you have something, test it. Now, whether or not you want to go out to external users at the point with like a paper napkin drawing, maybe not. But you can test within your company. You can walk around your office when you're allowed back in the office to see what people think about what your original concept looks like. And we did that at Work Market all the time. And then next stage is when you have something that you feel is ready to put in front of users. You'll have certain standards as a company that you'll want to adhere to. And for us, we look towards our design team for what those standards would be for user interviews before you even have a mock. And luckily with Work Market, we had a platform where we could invite people with putting an assignment on the platform and say, hey, it was very easy to manage that way. And we had a lot of freelancers to talk to. And then just when we had the prototype, we would put another assignment. So it's really up to you and your company to
Everything
identify.
Is fluid.
It's super fluid. And I would say just be very aggressive about it. Like somebody needs to tell you why you can't do it the way you want to do it, kind of thing. Like if you have something in your hand that you are ready to show someone, even if it's super low fidelity, why can't you? Like what's stopping?
Right. Okay, everyone. As we wind down our session, I want to thank Dan for being really generous with his time and being a guest on Recess. And obviously, your answers are great. We have so many other questions that we didn't get to ask you, but thank you for sending your questions, everyone. Dan, where can people find you if they want to read more of your hot takes, your advice? Are you on Medium, Twitter, LinkedIn?
I'm only on LinkedIn. I tend to just reshare articles for the most part that I found interesting. But yeah, add me on LinkedIn and send me a message there. If I didn't happen to get to your question, I'm happy to respond there as well.
Awesome. That's so generous of you. So we'll be posting this recording and a summary with time codes on Medium, so look forward to that. Our next Recess session will be June 9th, and we look forward to having you all join us. Thanks again, everyone, for dropping by. Have a great week. Thanks, Dan.
Thanks for having me.
Bye.